It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Benchtalk 101.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Benchtalk 101. Tonight we have Glenn Cahilly-Bretzin, who is going to be talking about the historical evidence and digital data underpinning the Centre in the Past project. This is a follow-on from Adam Lynch's presentation a few weeks ago. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please wait until the end of the presentation, and if you raise your hand using the reactions button, and we will come to you in turn. Over to you, Glenn.
Listen, thank you, Paul. So I'm just going to share my screen. Are people seeing a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
It has Centre in the Past. Fantastic. Cool. So, yes, as Paul just mentioned, this is sort of a part two, the return of the Centre in the Past, and also sort of the final leg of it. And I guess I'm speaking then on behalf of a wider team, both a team of academics at the University of Liverpool, Alex Buchanan, Nick Webb, and myself, as well as some timber framers and stonemasons, Adam Lynch, Pete Isles, and Rachel Ragg in particular, who have all sort of collaborated in bringing this project sort of to fruition. And I guess the aim of the talk today is just to give sort of the academic underpinnings, or let's just say the theoretical research that went into the project, and then how we match that with the practical research or lived experience, I suppose, of the craftsmen involved to make the centering a reality. So in that sort of vein, I thought I might just start with this quote from Vitruvius. And Vitruvius was a Roman engineer, and in his treatise on architecture, which was widely copied and widely read during the medieval period, he opens up with a quote about what an architect should be or is. I'll just read it out. It says, "The knowledge of the architect is furnished from many disciplines and varied kinds of learning, which are achieved through other arts. This work is born of practice and theory." And the reason why I think I would like to start with it here is that I think the project as a whole really sort of tried to look back at this pre-modern archetype, let's say, of the architect and the builder being both somebody who came up through the tools and learned their craft, as well as somebody who theoretically studied the principles of engineering, the philosophy of building. So that sort of spirit of trying to marry these two different approaches to understanding historical or heritage buildings is really the motivation or the inspiration behind the build. So from the just next slide. So that academic, let's say in scare quotes, side of the project was really initiated by the Tracing the Past project. And this was a project that ran since I think 2019. Was led by Alex Buchanan and Nick Webb. And the main thrust of that project was investigating Gothic ribbed vaults, and in particular, how we can understand those vaults by detailed digital scanning and digital analysis of those structures. So the real reason, or part of the reason why they say, well, we should look at this digitally, is that many of these structures are either incomplete, incomplete surveyed or not surveyed at all. And many of those surveys were started or completed in the 19th century or early 20th century using manual surveying techniques. Um, which if you sort of look at the graphic, it works in a place like in Norwich Cloister or small vaults that are low down. But when you're trying to study or accurately analyze how high vaults were constructed, you sort of run into issues because the impracticality of getting sort of manual surveying tools up at those great heights and then accurately measuring those distances, which can be pretty great. So the Tracing the Past project went about digitizing as many of these vaults as we can, and each year they still try to uh, scan and capture each addition an additional church or church, cathedral, abbey somewhere that has high vaults. And in particular, they're looking at ribbed vaults. And so just to um, I mean, this is probably just preaching to the choir here, but just to clarify exactly what I'm talking about when we're going through this picture on the left here is a example of the ribs of what a ribbed vault uh, is and the various elements of it. So you have the ribs, which are sort of independent archways that bound the vault, and then the web is the stone infill between the two between the ribs. Sorry. Um, and then this is just another graphic that sort of gives you a glossary of terms. We're not going to go into any of these, and I'm not going to use these specific terms, but if people want to go back afterwards with the video to look at these. Um, but basically, these are the structures that we're looking at. We're looking at stone ribbed vaults and how they were put up. And so the Tracing the Past project analyzed or approached the digital surveying using a few different methods, and they found that by combining these three methods together, which each have their strengths and downsides, um, you can create highly accurate uh, digital digital models or 3D models of a structure. And so by scanning the same structure several times using laser scanning or photogrammetry, we can then put those into a program like Rhinoceros and come up with 3D models like what we have on the screen now, which when you stick them all together, then can give you a 3D model of a whole cathedral or a whole building. Um, and with this 3D model, we can then start to reverse engineer or try to unpick um, the design process that the original builders had approached, as well as be able to analyze in a lot more detail some of the design features or construction decisions that were made, things that are not visible to the naked eye when stood on the ground, but when you're looking at very close measurements, you can pull it out. Um, and we tend to start uh, first by, if you look on the right side, by pulling out what we can identify from the plan view, so the sort of the bird's eye view down from the vault. And then from there, we'll analyze the elevation view. Um, and so for vaults, the main thing, or the first port of call that we really want to identify with the ribs is how the arches were identified and how the arches were, the curvatures of the arches and what method were used or was used to get the geometry of that arch. And the reason why we try to start with that is because we feel that this is also the starting point for the medieval craftspeople, both the stonemason, the master mason, and the master carpenter who would have been collaborating on these structures. So, depending upon what the known elements were for the those builders or for the particular site, there are different ways just using a straight edge and a divider or compass, just medieval geometry, we can very accurately get back to the curvature and the radius of um, each of those vaults or curves. So on the right hand side, this is Chester the one of the curves from the Chester Cathedral chapter house vestibule, which we will come back to in a second. But this is all me just sort of lining up these are the digital processes that we are using when we're starting to try and analyze things based upon the fabric that exists as it is. And in this way, we're trying to essentially get back to a modern tracing floor or trying to analyze the structures as if we were in the shoes of the medieval architect in some capacity. Um, and so this is again, we're starting with a plan view, and then from the plan view we can say, okay, we know the springing point and we know the apex. Now we just need to figure out what the missing sort of element in that equation will be the radius or we can go elsewhere. And um, that sort of mimics what we see in existing tracing floors. Um, but again, bringing us back to um, bringing us back to that sort of initial quote, and this is this is another passage concerning centering from the medieval period. We understand that doing all this digital analysis is really just one piece of a very large puzzle and only one perspective. In order to actually understand the structure, we really need to look at it from a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of different disciplines or trades. And so this, I think, quote captures it or reflects it a little bit, or it reflects it succinctly. And this is from the 15th century charter of Hereford Cathedral, and it's uh, basically a builder's receipt or invoice, as it were, or contract. And it said, furthermore, the same Thomas, who was a stonemason, shall make or cause to be made the whole vault of the cloister, and shall find sufficient stones for the same work, and he shall have for the said stones as much timber in the Lord's woodland for the lower roof, i.e., the centering, as the carpenter of the said church, that is Hereford, estimates in plans ought to pertain to it. So the reason why I highlight this passage is it, again, really shows that even though we can have this digital approach, at the time, these were structures that needed both the stonemason and the carpenter to be working together. And so therefore, just as they were collaborating, we should be collaborating too, and we should be looking at it with the perspective of craftspeople who are still using these skills or the tradition of those skills today. And so now that was a long preamble to actually get to the project that we're talking about, which is the centering the past, where we're really focusing on the craftspeople who put up the structures and how that digital data mixed with the lived experience can uncover new insights into how builders worked during the medieval period. And we're particularly looking at centers or centering. And so this is the timber formwork that was used to support the stone ribs while things were being raised. And as we're investigating the the centering, or we're looking to understand um, any sort of medieval evidence first, we have several different avenues that we can pursue to, or seven different types of evidence to consider. And the first of those is pictorial. So sorry if I go back. We have here in the lower right-hand corner, to the right of the, or in between these sort of pre-modern depictions of the master architect, a centering that's holding up a barrel vault, it appears, or some sort of archway. And we have several other images from the medieval or pre-modern period of either scaffolding or the construction of vaults that shows timber formwork of various ilks. The problem that we might consider with these as evidence, or we might, as we're looking at them, keep the caveat that the person who is uh, executing the illustration or the drawing may or may not actually understand what they were looking at or what they were trying to depict. This is somebody who may have experience with centering and therefore is capturing accurate details of how centering may have functioned, or they may have been somebody who only saw something and glanced by it and then is just trying to remember what they maybe had in their memory. Um, and so this is particularly important when we're trying to think about what what shape or type of frame centering took, how it was being supported. Um, and of course, there's the issue of pre-modern art often being highly stylized and not necessarily focusing on um, dimensional realism, as it were. So if we look at this image on the right-hand side, it's clearly representing the construction of a cathedral or major building, but the um, the people are not proportional or scale in scale to the structure that they're using. So um, we have to as for all the clues and sort of um, answers that the images like that might provide us, it also raises a lot of questions and queries in the same capacity as the image on the left, which is from much later on in Peter Bruegel's depiction of the Tower of Babel. Here we see something that is much more proportional or realistic, um, but then just because Peter has drawn or depicted these details, it's up to us to now think about whether, for example, the fact that all of these centers are being grounded or are being supported on poles all the way to the ground, is that how it would have been done, or are there other methods? So that's just to say that pictorial evidence is one bucket. The other bucket we have are textual resources or documentary evidence. Um, we don't have very many sources as concerns centering, or we don't have many narrative depictions of centering in medieval texts. So this is one of the very few examples that we have been able to find so far that mentions how centering was used, or how the centering was, how people were actually approaching these frames and these structures, and how they were raising them, or in this case, striking them. And this little, it's a off remark, or a mention in a large, in this particular instance is a mention in a miracle account for Thomas a Becket, in which, uh, as you'll be able to read from the slide, a priest and one of his clerics decide that they want to take the formwork down over an altar so they can start using the altar. And so they take it upon themselves to remove the centering, to strike it, um, And either because they had uh, struck it too soon and the mortar had not been set, uh, because there were only two of them, they may have, uh, as they were lowering the frame, they may have not lowered it. If it was a vault, they probably would have needed at least four people to lower it evenly. But if a centering is lowered unevenly, it will push the vault out of skew, or the vault itself just wasn't set properly. In either capacity, the story tells us they tried to remove the centering and the vault collapses. But fortunately, St. Thomas stops them from being crushed under the falling stones. So again, an instance where the text gives us a tantalizing taste or glimpse of maybe how people were using these structures or these constructions, but not actually explicitly what happened and what was done. And then likewise, the other main textual information we have are from building contracts or receipts, like the one we mentioned earlier, but also things like this building expenditure from the 1200s, that over a period of that records that over a period of 6 weeks, three carpenters for making centering uh, and so here we have different types of timbers or different sizes of timbers distinguished from one another. It's been translated as principal beams, planks, boards, and laths. Um, but again, the caveat in terms of as we're looking at these evidence, in this case, we can say, oh, okay, this gives us an idea of how long it took a certain number of presumably skilled craftsmen to create these structures, and these were the materials that they needed. Uh, Again, the problem is, does the person writing this down, uh, do they understand what they're writing, or are they using a uniform language across different sites so that we can identify is the say, for example, the what's translated here as a principal beam, the word that in Latin is used as trabs, or trabibus. Is trabs being used the same at Dover as it is, for example, at York or in London or in Gloucester? So it raises, I guess, some questions about how, again, as much as these texts give us insights, they raise more areas of uncertainty that uh, we need to get other pieces of the puzzle together to fill. And the last bit of evidence that we might look at is if we have any surviving centering still in situ. And this is the only bit of surviving centering from the medieval period that we know of. We have from the early modern period, there is a bit of bridge centering in, ooh, I think it's Austria. I'm now blanking on that exactly where it is, but this is the only bit of ribbed vault centering that we know exists. And the only reason why it seems to have been left in place for us to study today is because it's in a tower which is not accessed regularly, and where the vault itself is the space under the vault is not really being used, and so therefore it was not necessary to take the centering down. Where the vast majority of other centers, the point is that you remove them once you're done putting the vault up, and so they are inherently temporary structures. In this case, we can look at the Lerbo centering and say, oh, okay, they're using local materials. They are sort of not expending a ton of effort into finishing those materials unless they need to. The only part of the beams or the supports which are actually joined or finished are the parts that actually join into the um, the spandrels or the timbers that are directly underneath the stones. The rest of the shaft is just left as it is. Um, but it is yeah, we might say it's a very effective, albeit not necessarily the most elegant solution. It's sort of just throwing however many sticks you need and it gets the job done. Um, so the idea for now is saying we have these various elements of or various parts of evidence that exist. Um, how might they tell us, or what might they tell us about the centering that was produced for spaces that, unlike Lerbo, were used and where the centering was removed? Um, so we chose as our case study the vestibule in front of the Chester Cathedral chapter house. So these are the area of the cathedral is circled there in red, and you can see a scan version of the vaults. It's a series of 9 bays, which are all quite regular, set in a grid pattern. And we chose these vaults as our case study for a couple reasons. One is that they are not terribly high up, so we can access them from the ground. They're not terribly complex, so we can experiment um, a bit more robustly as a sort of first stepping stone. Um, but they are also the earliest example, at least in Britain, of vaults which continue seamlessly from where the molding continues seamlessly from the piers or the columns up through the ribs into the apex. So if you look at that image on the left-hand side, there are no capitals. There's nothing that breaks up the the round the rounded molding, the bead molding, as it were, as it comes up into the apex. And so it again suggests okay, these presumably were um, the centering for these had to be a self-contained unit that did not rely at all on the stone piers in the way that we might expect with sometimes with the centerings that go over vaults or for bridges where the centering would rest on the capitals or on the base of the vault of the arches. And because there are 9 vaults that are regular enough uh, set in a grid pattern, the Chester vaults enable us to experiment and see how many different um, sets of formwork were required to raise this space. Could the same piece of formwork be used multiple times? Would you need a set of 3? Would you need a set of 4? Basically, how many could you use um, to raise these vaults and therefore save on the labor and the material? Or what's the practicality in raising these sort of grids? And again, here's a sort of the shot from below of exactly what I was just sort of referring to in terms of how regular those vaults are. And on the left-hand side is the basically the raw data that we had from the scans, which essentially showed that all these vaults are within a matter of 7 millimeters to 2 centimeters in measurement. So they are very, very close and regular across the whole pattern. Um, there isn't a terrible amount of variation. So with these vaults, we took the scanned data and um, developed an idea of what the inside measurement of the stones would have to be, in the thinking that uh, as the stonemason and carpenter who raised those vaults, the stonemason would have said, okay, here's our, or I should say the architect, whomever has sort of precedence at that time, um, would have said, this is the inner arc that I want to achieve. And then the carpentry, the master carpenter and the master mason would have then um, said, cool, these are the lines that we're going to work from. Both the stones are going to work upwards from those lines and from these points, and from the timber carpentry point of view, we need to be able to support that that curvature, and so we need to build up to that line from below. Um, yeah, and so then for us as a team in January, having that data in hand, I then approached Adam and Pete, and Adam sort of already covered a little bit of that conversation and the initial discussions in to begin with, but just to reiterate that through our conversations, the whole team sort of said, well, agreed that the main thing that we need with the centering is that it's rigid and strong enough to hold the stones together and to hold them up during construction without deflection. So it can't, the frame has to hold its shape without distorting, especially because um, with the vaults or the ribs um, that head into the middle of the vestibule and are not bounded by a wall. Any sort of deflection in the timber work would presumably push that pier out of alignment and out of place, and then cause problems to um, the rest of that space and the other vaults that would be constructed. So it needs to be rigid and strong, the centering. Uh, we'd also like to experiment with centering or with formwork that can be struck and reused multiple times. And in that capacity has to be able to be dismantled within a close space under the completed vault without impacting it. Part of the reason why the Lerbo vaults in Sweden are still there is that the only way to dismantle that that formwork would be to cut down to cut the poles in some capacity, and then to take them down in pieces. There would be no way to reuse that centering after dismantling it or striking it. And it just wasn't what that particular bit of formwork was designed for. We are wanted to test the hypothesis um, of how centering that was reused, how would that be designed and how would we go about doing that? Um, and again, the final thing is just sort of the reminders. It needs to be able to hold itself. The timber work needs to hold itself under tension so that not only is it, excuse me, strong enough to take the uh, the weight of the stones on top of it without collapsing, it also needs to be able to take that weight without splaying outwards and holding it and knocking down other piers. So again, the limitations of this design, which we had from the surviving from the medieval period, is that it is not reusable. So uh, it is useful, or was useful for us to think about. This is from local materials, and they were perhaps taking an economy of labor into account in terms of how much they had to do to make it finished if it wasn't going to be um, seen they only needed to finish the parts that were being used for joints for mortise and tenons. There are of course other projects, or I should say, there is another project which bears mentioning that has tried to experiment with similar questions or has taken similar approaches, and the reconstruction of the castle at Guédelon in France is the sort of primary gold standard for this, and they have tried several different, or they have constructed several different forms of centers, which were good inspirations for us, um, especially in um, this particular set, which were used for vaults on either side of its towered gatehouse. And I'll use come out here, but they have definitely tried different forms and different approaches for their different for different areas of the castle. And so from these, we definitely drew say, okay, they are also using local materials. They're using, in this case, oak. They're using hewn oak, so it's not sawn. They're able to get the curvature by hand manipulating or hand um, shaping each of those timber members with an axe, um, and that they're using the timber. They're setting the stones directly onto the timbers. So as you can see on that right hand side, um, they are setting the uh, yeah the voisars, this stone directly onto the timber work. The one catch with that design is it doesn't have any tie beams or tie members. It's perhaps easier in this image, and so that the frame is not holding itself under tension, which is fine for for the Guédelon structure, because as that would have been put under weight, you have the heavy walls of the tower to keep the wooden shape in shape. But for us with the pier, we would need to have some sort of tie member. The other thing that we wanted to experiment with is um, most of the pre-modern images of centerings involve some sort of central post to presumably to support the boss stone. So on the right-hand side, again, that stone that is resting right at the apex, which seems to have been set first, and then the voisars or the rib stones set up afterwards to it. And we can talk about that later in the questions if people are curious why. But in order to support that in Guédelon, they created this sort of frame yoke shape. We wanted to try a slightly different design to experiment. If a lot of the medieval images seem to show some sort of center post closer to what they did on their um, the the centers that they have on the left-hand side of the screen. Um, how would that what sort of design approach, or how would that change what we did? So the initial sorry, I have uh well, I should say we initially mocked up um a a design in a small 1 to 12 scale model. Um, and then I brought it to Pete and Adam and said, okay, well, this is the first attempt and the first thought, but this is coming from uh, my experience, which is I have some experience um, as a cabinet maker and a little bit of experience as a timber framer, but I am not a master, or I would not even necessarily refer to myself as a timber framer um, per se. So I was like, well, this is, this is one idea, but I don't think it works. And then Pete and Adam gave their thoughts and their feedback, and so we came to a revised design, which is what we have here on the right-hand side, where I reworked the design into another 1 to 12 scale model, which we could then sort of play around with in a 3D print of the vaults. So using the scanned data, we were able to 3D print the vault in miniature, and then we could play with it with the vault with this model to see if it could do what we needed it to do. At least in terms of being able to strike the centering within a very confined space. And it seemed to achieve a couple different aims for us. Particularly, compared to the first model, the second design had a lot more simpler joinery for the central post and braces. It used shorter timbers, and so it would presumably be lighter and wouldn't be as resource intensive. Um, it could be compartmentalized a bit more, so there are fewer parts had to move together, so that once it was lowered and removed, or there was distance between the timber work and the stonework, the timber frame could be dismantled um, uh, asymmetrically. It didn't have to be dismantled all at once. We could take out one spandrel at a time in some capacity. So that was a benefit in terms of how much labor might be required in it. And then it used fewer pegs and seemed to cleave a bit closer to what we had in images from the medieval period. So once we had that design sort of sussed out and we decided this is what we're going to shoot for, it was time to actually to build the thing. And we were fortunate that the project had was supported through the AHRC Impact Acceleration Award, which enabled us to pay for the materials that we then were able to process using historical historical timber techniques. So in May, we had a hewing weekend where a group of some really fantastic hewers from Britain came together and we worked on some local sort of fence grade oak. And this again, Adam sort of went through that May workshop in more detail in his talk. And then once we had the oak down to size, we decided, well, we need to come up with our own framing floor. And so uh, reproducing or trying to recreate uh, the method or experience of a tracing floor. We have two medieval tracing floors that exist. One at Wells Cathedral from left-hand side, another at York Cathedral, saying, okay, these are workshop design spaces in which the structure would have been laid out in full plan on a plaster floor. And then once they had decided, this is the geometry we need, these are the measurements we need, they could transfer those to the workshop itself to make a framing floor. We decided we needed to do the same. So in September of 2025, we then built our own framing floor or tracing floor out of several sheets of ply with white emulsion paint, and we're able to lay out the frame in full scale so that we could move turn those timbers into the finished product. So this is Pete Isles, who is the real master builder, or master carpenter behind uh, the build design. And he had laid out the design here, and you can see him working on the right, and it's again purely using uh, dividers, string, uh, trammel, and straight edges. So we weren't um, the only measurements we took were measurements that were from um, the existing stones, and then we were able to create our own rule or rod for the build based on those measurements to be used on the build. And then once we had it there, we were able to use that for scribing and putting the timbers together. So these are just some images of us being able to float the hewn timbers over the tracing floor on the design in full plan, so that we could then scribe or transfer the necessary joints and layout onto the beams themselves. And for this, again, we were using as much as possible the medieval methods. So everything was done by using plumb bobs and string. You can see on the left there the levels that we were using throughout were plumb levels. They're not using any bubble levels, so these are just uh, a planed straight wooden surface with a weighted line. And then each of the joints themselves were all hand cut, having been marked out using shoulder plumb scribing. So again, there's everyone lining up their joints and sort of lofting the frame together. When it came to actually putting to shaping the timbers, not to be the broken record, but all hand tools. You can see Adam there on the right hand side using a plumb level for making sure we had everything on its squared or its level datum points. Um, and then in this image, just it nicely encaptures that we were hand awing everything out with a shell auger, or we used a couple different augers to experiment and develop some sort of catalog of um, what the bottom of what different auger bits um, left behind at the bottom of mortises for conservation to sort of inform conservation work. But then everything was done with those plumb levels and by chisel. Once we had all of the timbers joined together, and we had the rough frame out on the left-hand side, but without the curvature, we were then able to scratch um, the curve onto that timber just using a trammel setup at um, with the radius as I'm sorry, Pete had laid out on the tracing floor, but also it's the radius that we have existing from the Chester Cathedral, the existing stonework. And with that line measured out, we were able to again hand hew down to get the final result. So you can see here the small little models next to the finished thing in the timber frame. So that uh, that's where we've come to at the moment. And I guess just to slowly wrap up, and a lot of it is again, it's been an amazing project so far, and one that we've really benefited from a huge amount of input and collaboration with um, a whole host of people, and really uh, the generous time and effort from this group of folks. And then there were unfortunately a few people that were absent for the photo when we took this photo, but were involved in the build. Um, but yes, huge thanks to all of the timber framers and stonemasons and academics who hopped in to partake. And so now from with the frame built, we have a sort of an initial list of research questions, which we'll start investigating as to how that framework or formwork was used and what it can tell us about. But it will be on display. So if you would like to come take a look at the formwork and some more details of it and play with some 3D printed models um, of the stones with that formwork, we will be displaying the completed structure at Chester, October 11th and 12th. And so it's a free event open to everybody. And the link for that is here, and you're more than welcome and love to see you there. If in the meantime, or you're just a glutton for punishment and would like more information, you can find more information on the digital side of things and the historical research through the Tracing the Past website, which is on the left there, and of course Adam Lynch and his you know very stocked and well storied YouTube channel has been chronicling a lot of this and will continue to chronicle more of the outputs as the frame continues. So that is it from me. Obviously, once again, huge thanks to the AHRC for their support, um, for funding the project, as well as the support of all the partners and people involved with the build. And if you have any questions, shoot them at me now or send me an email with them later.
Thank you very much, Glenn. That was a really interesting and in-depth view of how you got to where you got. Now, since I'm the host tonight, I will ask the first question. So, the actual vaults themselves, though, do you think that they might have built them in sort of like, if it was sort of like, I think there were 9 in a block, that they might have done
Yes.
three in a row so that they interlocked?
Yeah, I mean, so how many centerings or what the process was?
Yeah.
Because here I can go back maybe to that slide if that helps. Yeah, here, I guess if that one works. Um, yeah, so I think I mean, one of the current theories and the thing we would like to check to see is whether they built like one row of 3 at a time and then marched um sort of leapfrogged the centering moving across the vestibule, or whether they needed at least 4 bits of formwork at any given point so that while they were working on one vault, they could be supporting it on either side with some other centers. So I think our current idea is that they would have been not built all at the same time, but we're trying to figure out exactly how many they would have had to build at once, if that makes any sense. So not all 9, but whether it was 3 vaults at once, or or if they could do it one vault at a time with 3 to 4 bits of wooden formwork is one of the questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
And next we will go to Andy Tuckwell.
Stop share for right now.
You just
Oh,
need to
sorry,
unmute Andy.
Unmute. Yeah, I expect I'm in line with most of my friends on the discussion here that whenever I've gone to a cathedral, I'm always looking up at it thinking, it looks so wonderful, but how did they do it? Just by muscle power,
Mm.
without great big diesel powered lifting equipment, and without the modern methods and tubular scaffolding. And I've done a little bit of reading in a few books and got the impression that really the subject that you're talking about here, there's almost no evidence to draw on. There's no equivalent of a written out set of instructions for how to do it. And the bits that I could find in ordinary books aimed at non-specialists were very sketchy indeed. And I'm just so pleased that there are projects like this, because I strongly believe that the only way you can really find out about old techniques is by trying it out and doing it with a bunch of experienced, intelligent people working together. So I'm ever so pleased this is happening. But as you want me to ask a question, I'll stick another one in. Reminded by your last picture of the 9 bays, have I got it right in my head that the strength of the use of the ribs in the vaulting is that you don't actually need very much centering, because you first build up that skeleton of the ribs and then you infill the pieces to make the actual vault in either French or English patterning from the bottom up, because by that stage you don't need the centering in place. That skeleton is self-supporting. Is that about right?
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, so first, thank you so much. I mean, I'm glad I'm glad that there are other crazy people out there that think the
Yeah.
project is worthwhile. Because I think likewise, the only way we're gonna figure out about it is by doing it. Um, Even if that's by making sort of figuring out how they didn't do it.
Yeah.
But in terms of your um, once the once the ribs are completed, then it becomes self-supporting. I think it's generally, I think, what we surmise, I think, often with it. And,
Mm,
and part of that is we have evidence of the webbing. So the yeah, as you said, that bit that goes in between the ribs,
mm,
they that sometimes is being used as centering for the infill. So um, at Lincoln Cathedral and at Durham, for example, we have several vaults. We have a couple instances of vaults where, because they're in tucked away corners of the cathedral, they've actually left boards lodged in between the rib. So actually, use my little model here. So this is the model.
yeah.
So they left boards lodged between the ribs coming up,
Yeah.
and they just sort of figured, oh well, we've got we stick a board here across these two, and then we can lay our stones on it, and then when we're done, we can cut that out, and then so in the case of Lincoln and Durham, for these couple instances, the guys clearly said, well, I can't be bothered. Maybe it's 5 o'clock.
Mm,
I'm out for tea. But otherwise, we can more often see, as is the case with Chester, a hefty mortar joint in between, like right at the top of the sort of the rib, in between the rib and the webbing, and a mortar joint that seems to get bigger the closer you get to the apex, where
mm.
at the bottom you don't really need the timber, because you can just sort of span that distance with a single stone. But then once you get to the higher up, you will need the timber work. So that's a very long-winded way of saying
Ah, I see.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's our current theory is
So
that
you might
way.
have put some timber in, let the mortar set, and then filled in the gap when you took the timber out. Is that what you mean?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And then we have this, I guess we have the perception that a lot of when we go into, for example, the vaults at Chester, they're all just the bare stone.
Mm.
At the time, they would have been lime washed, or they would have been probably had a layer of plaster and a lime wash over them, and or were painted further than that. So when we're going and looking at the infill of some of these webbings, they can look really higgledy-piggledy or sort of
Yeah.
shoddy work, but it just would have been a white, or it would have been a solid.
Was that the Victorian phase for scraping all the plaster off? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where some art historians may be able to give a much finer point. So I think if the Victorians were definitely big ones for that.
Yeah.
But it was also following on from a Reformation thing of they'd also be painted. So if they had any
Of course.
iconography on it,
Yeah.
then that could be something that got expunged.
Mhm.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Glenn.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And next we will go to Andy Tuckwell. Sorry, Andy Brown.
I'm going to say try me. Yeah. What am I? Yeah. Glenn, thank you. Sorry, I missed your start. You may have covered this, what I'm thinking, in that time, but I don't think you did, because when you got to that bit you've just shown, I was watching. So when all of this is up, the forces exerted are going down the pillars.
Yes. So when it's up, so while for example the forces from the individual stones.
Yeah. So well, the whole vault at the end of the day is compressing down onto the pillars.
Yes, yeah, and there'll be some also lateral thrust.
This is the next thing I'm going to say. On the outside of all 9 of these, what takes the thrust of all of it?
Yeah, so the outside of it, there are heavy walls on 2 sides. And then, so again, maybe if I'll go to the slide. It might be easier if I pull up that
Yeah, it's a lovely plan.
the plan of,
use it
let's
to its
see,
full extent.
I'll pull up the plan of the cathedral, and then where are we at? There we are. So if I return to Zoom, share this, play from current slide. So if people can see this.
I can zoom in on that myself. Oh,
or is this zooming in on it at all? Or is
Yes.
that just me? So so these are the nine vaults right there. So on the north and south, they're bounded by some heavy walls. One is the wall that separates the slype from the dormitory, I believe, and then the other is the north transept for the cathedral. On the west side, you have then there are another set of vaults with the cloister, which will help buttress the thrust there, and then those cloisters themselves are buttressed on the outside, as you can sort of see with the footing. And then on the east side is the chapter house. So those walls are not solid, but they are relatively heavy. In terms of there are windows that go through them.
A lot of windows in the chapter house. Looking at that,
yeah.
And so the chapter house have got the exterior buttresses on all three. Yes, yes. Well, not
Yeah.
near enough. Now, what sort of height are you looking at the chapter house vaulting to the? Sorry, I forgot what this vaulting is. The VN.
Oh, the vestibule?
Yeah. So the crown of the pillar, or sorry, the top of
Yes.
the pillar where the arc strikes off from, is that a comparable sort of height to the pillars on the other constructions from around its perimeter? Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yes. Yeah. So, um, it is. So I'll float back to here. The chapter house. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly how much taller, but they are at least twice as high as the vestibule, or twice or three times as high. They are much
Is that
higher.
is that from the striking point or to the peak of the vault?
Uh, Both.
Both, right?
I think so the vestibule. Um, I wish I had a photo from the cloister looking out over it. The vaults that we're looking at and the ones that are sort of circled here are um, a, l- about 4 meters from ground level to the apex. The
Mm,
the inside apex of the vault, or the quote unquote introdos. And
mm,
it was like a ground floor covered passageway, because above it, the there was a passage. People would walk on top of these vaults, excuse me, moving from the dormitory, which
right.
is this
Yeah.
the building, the structure above it. So I think that might be a cellar. So there's a dormitory on the first floor, and they would move across the dormitory. I'm sorry, from the dormitory across these vaults to get into the north transept. Um, but the chapter house is at least 2 stories to the springing point,
Right.
if I remember correctly. So yeah,
Right.
I think that's
Yeah. Okay. So that's given me a good picture of what the so this so what I'm coming back to is the ability to create 9 volts and not have anything. If you were doing 3,
mm,
what is in position to stop the external forces tumbling the volt down when you strike out the centering? Because just from my sort of the way I look at forces and things and stuff like that, I, I'd I'd love to say, well, you'd have to have all 9 of these in place, do all
yeah,
the centering, get all that built, and then obviously at the same time you've got to put in the external supports for all of that centering around the outside of it. So
mm,
is there a date for the chapter house and the centering we're talking about? Um, is this um, of a same date, or do you know what I'm trying to say? Has it been added?
yes, yeah, I think so. So the chapter house and the vestibule seem to be contemporaneous. Potentially the chapter house slightly earlier.
Hmm,
And these are so the mid 1200s for them.
right,
Um, and we'd have accounts from Westminster Abbey, I believe, that do talk about the leapfrogging of centering, in terms of they had, when they were going down something, the nave or something like the chapter house, they would have
right.
had 2 sets of centering so that as they'd start at one end, they'd build up the walls first, and then once they and potentially also put the timber roof on top of the walls, which would help give more weight thrusting down to stabilize the walls from the pressures of the this vaults when they were being put in. And then when they were doing the vaults for the nave, they would start at one end and they'd have two centerings going where they'd once they finished the first, they would have this, or as they were building the first, they'd have this second next to it to help buttress, as it were.
Right.
And then once they finished, they would sort of move that centering around, like to the third slot, if that makes any sense. And then they would sort of leapfrog down so that there was always one centering sort of supporting the vault that was being built next to it. So the reason why we were thinking, oh, maybe there were four bits of formwork for the Chester vestibule is that if we had one row that had one continuous row of formwork, you could then have one floating formwork that sort of moved up the line, as it were. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I just I mean, I love this. I love the details and trying to pick it to pieces and what have you. And I relish what you're doing because I love what you're doing. And this being a 9 almost leaves at some point in the construction without doing all 9 together. It almost leaves room for the forces to push a pillar over. That's I mean, obviously I'm just going by what I've just seen you doing and this, and
Yeah.
but now if you were, like you say, the account for, what did you say, Westminster?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the account on that is for vaults in a line, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
Which to a large extent, with your outside walls already in, you've got the support in your buttresses already there, and you've said you quite likely have
Yeah.
them on. Now, I dare say the roof would have been more use as something to stop the walls from splaying outwards.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, yes, of course, that's the same principle. But yeah, I can see the principle behind that, where you do leapfrog from one to the next and across. But with this, it's almost like there must be some sort of game where you have to pick things out, and you pull one out,
Right.
the thing drops. And I get that feeling that unless you did the whole square of the 9 together, it would create. I mean, it would be amazing for you to get on the old 3D printer and
Yeah.
scale model the load as it sits in the drawing, and see what happens if you was just doing 3 or 3 or 6 or. But then I think 9. I think 9 would be the way to go in my book. It's just in my thinking. It's a because not terribly large structures. I mean, so I was looking to nip over and see Adam and the team on Friday, and
Oh yeah.
I was expecting something quite a bit bigger.
Yes. Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's big enough. I mean, you don't want to be picking that up on your own, and you ain't going to. But yeah, it's so from a construction point of view and cost, the legwork, the high pay grade is the setting out and getting that first one made, and then a lower skill set could quite easily be used just to basically repeat, and
Yeah.
that would, where if you were looking at a cost, you know, that would essentially, if you were doing one centering, the cost is the one centering. Doing multiples, obviously, it's like any job. If you're doing multiples, the price is down, obviously. But yeah, and timber, well, I dare say it would have cost something back then, but I think there's plenty of it about.
Yes, yeah. And I guess that's the thing, is that the foundations, or the abbey or whatnot, would have owned some sort of forests
Mm, mm.
um to give it, and presumably could also use for certain centering, the coppiced material, which would be presumably cheaper. But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, I just, wrote down your suggestion. I mean, I'd love to again, as you said, do 3D print and to try out saying, well, if you only support
Mm. I mean,
support, yeah, where the weaknesses come in, because
yeah, I mean, down to scale, obviously. So I've seen your little 3D printer up at there
yeah,
now. Now, with that in mind, you probably do need to over egg the pudding by putting excessive weight on top of it to create them
yes, yeah,
forces, and probably over egg just really go for it,
yeah,
and because at the end of the day, this should even on a 3D printed scale model should be able to stand an enormous amount of weight, and the
yeah,
only thing that's going to stop it is the lack of support around its periphery.
yeah,
So it's that I mean, one side of there has got a massive building, and then you've got the chapter house the other side, and the weak one for me is that corridor, the whichever one.
E1,
Yeah,
yeah,
that corridor, because you've got that other building at the back of that. So I assume there's some. So that's SL. There's some more bolts there.
yes, but it's just,
Yeah,
yes. So those vaults are, though, between two pretty heavy walls.
yeah, yeah. No,
Um,
no. I would love to see it all a bit closer.
yeah.
But,
Well, I mean, if you're able to make it to Chester in October, I guess
well,
not this week, but next week.
well, unfortunately, that weekend I'm exhibiting at the National Ploughing Championships.
Oh, well, congratulations for that. But
But anyway, not to worry.
yeah, I mean, the other one is, it will be, hopefully the materials for it will be floating around with Adam and the Carpenters Fellowship after October, so that
Yeah, well, I mean,
um,
I've seen the well, uh, to be honest, they did a fantastic job. I seen them on Friday, and
yeah,
then when I seen the post up on Sunday and they got it completed, I thought, oh, I weren't expecting that. Well done, Phil.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Glenn.
No, no, no. Well,
What
yeah,
this?
thank you. And well, I'll definitely, we'll keep testing we'll give the 9 vaults, or like the 9 bay thing, more tests, and we'll keep everyone abreast of how that goes.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, that it looks like that is the last question that we actually have. Unless anybody's got any further questions.
Well, I can come in with another one if you.
If you've got another question, Andy, by
Yeah,
all means.
I didn't actually see how this came to pieces. Is it just a? So, oh yes, there was another question. You've got the king post in the middle, so
Hmm.
all the weight is So I mean, there's a lot of weight just in this centering on its own.
Yeah.
Now, the tie beams going crossways.
Yeah.
There's a massive amount of material removed at the intersection. So what I was trying to work out is, do the two, what do you call the diagonal ones? The
Like
brace?
like the spandrels or the
No, the diagonal ones coming from the rib down to the just
oh,
down
the
to
like the struts or braces that.
yeah, the braces. Yeah. So are those under tension, or what's the other one? I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they. I mean, this is
Tension.
one of the questions. Is we drilled everything with pegs,
Yeah.
so or to take pegs, in the idea that everything could be both under compression and tension.
Mm.
Um, the obviously that raises the especially pegging the king post raises questions about the ease of reuse, which again goes to your earlier point about if labor is cheap, or if you can get cheaper labor, and you know you're going to be able to recycle the materials anyway, maybe it would be better to build nine structures because you'd only need to put them up once rather than worry about taking them down and moving them around. Um, but then, yes, the center, the sort of center posts or yeah, when I was at Frame, people were questioning whether it's a true king post, and I'm not experienced enough to to get into the semantic details of whether it's a king post or a crown post or a king strut or whatnot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the I'd have liked to have seen. Oh, sorry, I forgot the strut. What were you calling the strut? Um, the
oh, just
diagonal,
the brace.
the
Here, I
brace.
can.
Okay, I'd have liked to see the brace under tension, because that that um, makes allowance for the king post and the weak center joint wanting to bow downwards. And under tension, it then puts the outer rib, under compression, which it should actually create the perfect truss. So it's basically a roof truss under its
Yeah,
simple form, and yeah, you would want that to be pulling against to counteract the weight of the king post, and to what all intents and purposes is a very weak center, a bit of joinery to the where the cross arvins are, and then obviously you've got the mortise in the top one to take the king post. So there's you've not got a lot of timber left there.
yeah.
But so yeah, and what sort of time period is your striking period on this sort of stonework?
Yeah, well, this is one. I mean, so for your point about the tensions, I mean, that's one where tensions in the supports. Um, yeah, well, I'll have to forward that question to Pete because I think he would be able
Mm,
to say
mm.
exactly where where he's yeah seeing the tensions in all of those
Yeah,
joints.
unfortunately, there wasn't quite enough of it together on Friday. So I got there about dinner time, and then they were popping off for that visit to
Yeah,
Sykes' timber yard. So I didn't really get a massive amount of detail off of what it got. So it so it looks like there's a
yeah. So it
right.
is.
So it's a is that a halving?
So they
No,
are
no,
um
is it? It's
they're sort of open
so
the open mortise and tenon, but they're not halved. So they are, you can sort of see
no,
it.
Bridal
it is.
joint, isn't it?
Bridal joint. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Andy. I should know this, shouldn't I? You think I don't do wood?
And
But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting looking at that and having to pick it to pieces as to whether that is going to take. And it would. I think that would. I think that would
Yeah.
pass muster to create the ability. I mean, the pegs are all in this circumstance.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, maybe
those outside curved pieces, there's actually they're only short, aren't they? They join inside the joints. You've not got a quarter of the circle in one piece, have you? You've got an eighth of a circle.
Yes.
I can't remember.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the on the as I zoom in, we're also sort of experimenting with one of the cross sort of frames. The idea is that we'd lay the stones directly onto the the timber.
Yeah.
On the other cross frame, we're going to put pads where we basically would put little shim pads where the mortar joint would be, so that as the masons are laying the each of the stones, they'd say, well, I only really need the contact point, and I only really need it to be accurate and shimmed up to my stone at this point. I don't need the whole curve to be exact. So that's why if this side, you can see that there's a bit of a gap, about an inch gap between the shoulder of the spandrel and the top of the bracer strut. Um, to your point, Andy, too, about this sort of the joint direct, or the sort of lap directly under the king post being a little bit weak. We don't have many images of what was, we don't have many images of centering, and even then
no.
we don't have many images of how they were supported. But if I go
So
back,
so to a certain extent, um, you you've just you say there's not many images of centering, but to a large extent, it's general house, well, building roof
mm,
geometry, and it's the same principle, but it's just something that you remove at the end of the day instead of leaving it in.
yes, yeah,
So I mean, I was going to have a look through Uzic's book before this, but I didn't get home in time to do that. Yeah, somebody say something else. Hewitt.
Hewitts. Oh, yes, yeah,
Yeah, because I'm I'm sure in there somewhere is almost a template for this sort of construction. Not like classed as a centering, obviously, because it's
yeah,
inside a building being used as a building. But no, it's yeah, I love it.
yeah,
I love this. I mean, so particularly in this form where you've actually got you're doing it for a vault rather than like the picture, the image there, where you're just doing it for an arch,
yes,
which is yeah, quite simple there really. But no,
yeah.
yeah, but
Well, yeah, the reason why I wanted to zoom on this one is that it seems like they're also supporting,
mm,
they have some sort of support directly under, if obviously the caveat, if we are believing any of this, but whether they recognize that's potentially a weak spot that needs
well,
a post all
so
the way.
the property I'm working on just at the moment with we've actually lifted one of the windows and lifted the arch. And so the guy who's doing the well, it's brickwork. So, but he's lime mortar man. So he put the centering up and done the archwork, and he weren't keen on me wanting to get it out before a week was up. You know, oh no, we've got to leave that a bit longer than that to let it all start setting inside and things like that. And from looking at that, I assume that centering is I mean, look at the construction above it, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
Superfluous,
still got
for
the
sure.
centering. So yeah, just how long were they leaving the centering?
Yeah. I mean, there's that passage of the priest getting impatient and taking it out, and maybe that is too early, but especially with hot quicklime, I don't know whether it would have to be up for terribly long. Maybe just 6 weeks or so. I guess it really depends upon maybe the side of the stone, but
given so if you do work on this sort of if you work on the principle of having 9 centers and you're doing all this, that could be left up there till just before finishing day, and you know, the belt and braces, you know that everything's set, and there's no need to work out, oh, dare we take it out yet, or as long as you can work around the supports for the centering and carry on working inside, you know, it's
absolutely.
a no-brainer. You just knock up 9, stick them in there, and leave it till just before the finish.
Yeah.
But
I'm not saying I've got something to add to that, Andy, but once the keystone's in the top and the lime never really fully sets properly because the lime's breathable, once the keystone's in, I think that would actually, the arches are all within a short space of time, it's self-loading.
Yeah.
So the actual center isn't actually needed below it, because once you get the keystone on the top of that, it's actually supporting itself with the mortar around about it.
Yeah, I mean this was
that weight above there. That weight above there has actually been taken by the stone rather than the arch center. The arch center might have still been in for that drawing or that picture, but it could probably have been dropped out right away almost, because everything above it's all been loaded down through the sides of the actual doorway.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing about the vaults as well, is that once you get it built up enough, the loads then taken from the top, from the, I'm not saying it's a keystone. What did you call the keystone at the top of this? There was a name for that one that was 4 ways.
Boss stone.
Yeah, so the boss stone, and it's like a keystone on an archway, except it's going in more than one direction. So I mean, once that's set in place and you've got your 4 ribs coming off of it, it's almost self-supporting. Apart from what Andy was saying about the load then being transferred to the walls.
Yeah,
the transferred right down. But I mean, this is 4 meters up, like you say, so it's pretty high up.
And sorry, I missed the time scale when the one collapsed on the unfortunate chap.
I can go back to that passage. It doesn't actually tell us the scale, other than it was just over. It just tells us it was over a vault over a altar. But I think we have several accounts of, I think, the builders wanting to keep the centering up longer, and then they come down when the priests get antsy about wanting to use the space under him.
Yeah.
But this is the only one I've been able to find where it goes pear-shaped.
So just on that passage, interesting thing about even though the ruinous mass fell over the head, amazingly enough, it could not harm the head that was under it.
Yeah.
Now, if the
Andy,
centering,
we've actually got a question. Richard Arnold's got a question as well.
Yeah. So almost with that, it says that the centering didn't land on him, because if the centering had been there, yes, it would have especially if it was the same centering like we've just constructed. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, cheers. Anyway,
yeah.
I'll let Richard have
Well,
a.
the other question with that, it makes me think that going back to your point, Andy, about the webbing versus um the ribs. One of my theories with this passage is that it's reflecting that the webbing had not been put up, had like the webbing hadn't been filled in when the priest was trying to take
Ah,
it down, because otherwise there's no way that the stones would have been able to, like, he couldn't have escaped the stones sort of thing from
yeah,
falling on, because they would have been completely covered in. But if it's just the ribs, then he could just be very lucky that his head was missed, because it does say that they felt it to his feet. So
mm,
yeah, maybe
Okay,
cross toes.
so now we'll go
cheers.
to Richard Arnold.
Hi there. It's just a thought. I was thinking about the large amount of work to make these centerings. Were they possibly, is there any evidence that they were saved and maybe transported to another site and used in another building? Have we got any evidence where we've got vaults of exactly the same size in nearby
I think that
ecclesiastical buildings close by where they perhaps used the centering somewhere else?
I think that is definitely one of my something I'm very curious about, and I think it's one of the research questions with the tracing the past, is trying to scan things, particularly in radiuses of or radii of cathedrals and large abbeys that would have a lot of this stuff hanging around. That, okay, we have a small parish church, this building. Your exact point, like, oh, surely they would have recycled it. What we do have for sure, and we know already, uh, and I think it's King's College Chapel in Cambridge. The masons were partly paid in the century, and so part of their remuneration is that
The
um,
centering with them.
they got to take the material with them,
Yeah,
either
yeah,
to reuse for more vaults, or to sell as building material, or whatnot. I mean, it's presumably all good, you know, it's um, all good material and stuff.
yeah, yeah,
But no, yeah, it's a great one that, yeah, we are trying. We would love to find out, if we can, the similarities between it. So we'll let you know if
yeah. Yeah, it was just a thought, but it just seemed a lot of work to go to then just sort of scrap it again. But did wonder whether they've managed to find similar vaults close by where they may have reused it. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
No, well, thank you. Well, no, well,
One other quick question. I mean, I would imagine from the research you've done, it's fairly obvious that they use this system. Um, I can't imagine how they do it, but I do remember visiting the Dome in Florence, which I know is a completely different structure in a way, but they've worked out that they didn't use any centering on that whatsoever.
mm,
They're not quite sure how he did it, but it would have been impossible. The amount of timber that would have been required to center that structure was impossible. So they must have done it without centering. There's no way they could have done this without centering, is there?
yeah. Well, so this is, yeah, that was Brunelleschi's whole sort of genius thing, and the famous story of when everyone was tendering to make the dome, he pulled out an egg, cracked an egg on a table, and said, "Bam, that's how I'm gonna do it." And
Hmm.
everyone said, "Crazy! You got to tell us exactly how you do it." And he's like, "Well, if I tell you how I'm going to vault the dome, then you'd have my job."
Yeah.
But yeah, so no, it is amazing. But I think that um there are people that have tried to find ways of, especially for the webbing, how to get rid of webbing, or needing centering for webbing. And a lot of them seem to also rely on, or come down to rely on brick. And that, the same thing with Burleschi's, with the Duomo in Florence, is that I think once we get into brick, we can do a lot more. You can do a lot more just by stacking brick in different ways and
yes, yeah, I see,
having
yeah.
where
Not really possible with stone as such. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, a bit harder. Now, the webbing stones are often we find tufa or chalk being used, some whatever the lightest locally available stone is. So I think they are trying to do things that minimizes how much support they need on that front. But I think as far as we can tell, they at least at least up until the 15th, 16th century that they need, well, up until brick, they need
They
some sort
need
of wood.
censoring of some sort. Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and we have another question from Andy Tuckwell.
Sorry, I've been sitting thinking about this now. Now that you've actually built this centering for a single square bay, and you've thought hard about the right joints to use at the intersections and so on, there's basically two ways to strike the centering once you've finished with it and you've got the arches built, isn't there? On a square bay like this, you could keep the whole structure that you've made in one piece and just rotate it in a horizontal plane, so it's off the corbels on the pillars that are holding it, and lower it down. Just that doesn't really sound very easy at all. Or you could be knocking pegs out and dismantling the whole thing one timber at a time, lowering each one down on a rope. Have you any feeling yet on which one would look more practical on that roof at that height? When you're looking up in the cathedral, sort of visualizing your heavy bits of wood hoisted up there.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I think it gets into, I can't remember who mentioned it, but the whole idea of moving it without moving it with basically just fulcrum points and um, fulcrum points, muscle like man power rather than horsepower or anything like that, and no steel toe boots. And I always think about that as we're lifting up these things. That you're like, oh God, these no wonder they crushed so many feet. But the other thing is, so one of the innovations or thoughts that we had is that this model is from the springing point of the arches, but the area that's sort of shown here with the flat off, those stones are often sort of referred to as the tas de charge, but they're basically stones that have a flat mortar bed. And so we realize we don't need the centering up to that. These stones don't need the centering, so we only need to start it here, which then means when we lower it, we end up having essentially that extra slice of wiggle room on the side. And so our current theory is that given that extra slice, it would make it easy enough to just pull off one timber at a time. And with this, at least this particular frame, it was relatively easy for one person to pick up any of the timbers except perhaps the tie beams. Perhaps, and also the king post might require two people, but then everything else, if you had two people, easy, very easy peasy. And by starting it slightly higher up, it only took about 6 inches or so. Dropping it, you had plenty of room to clear the mortise, like to remove a timber without getting caught in the mortise. So that was our current thinking. But next Thursday, so a week from today, when we set up the frame at Chester, we've CNC routed a 1-to-1 scale of the um of the blocks, the stone blocks in foam, so
Oh
that we
wow,
can start playing with these things. That and I think you're
full scale.
full scale, yeah.
Wow.
So just to
Yeah.
match the timber work,
Mm.
and that's where we'll start to experiment. We won't be able to experiment with the load pushing per se, because
No, no.
the foam won't. But the nice thing with the foam is it will be much more sensitive to us nudging it with things. So that's where we can
Yeah.
see, oh, well, how easy is it for us to twist and shunt out or not.
That sounds a much more
No.
enjoyable and more fruitful method than a architectural historian sort of doodling in his study, thinking, "Oh, of course it was done like this," and making it up as they go along. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah. No, well, again, like again, if anyone wants to play with us next Thursday, do come along, and regardless, it will
Wish I could, but
the materials will be floating around for future experiments for people want to line that up.
thank you.
Okay, that looks to have concluded all the questions. Oh, nope. Simon Coldrick has jumped in at the last minute. And
Very quick question. In terms of timescale, so that centering goes into place. The stonemasons carry on working the set time afterwards. How long is that centering start to finish in place before you lower it?
Yeah, well, like it's the part of it is we're not 100% sure yet, and that's one of the things that we'll need to work on. So if we think about that receipt from Dover Castle, it took 3 carpenters 6 weeks to build the centering for the new gate, which unfortunately I'm not actually sure how it compares to the size of what we're doing, but um, I can't imagine it being much larger a space than ours. So we think 6 weeks is what they were being billed for um, getting raw material through to something to the full construction.
And this is working in green.
Presumably working in green. Yeah.
Right. So how long then? So 6 weeks to build those centerings.
Yeah.
Then how long do you think them? I mean, I'm not looking for a schedule
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
but how long do you think the masons would be working
Yeah.
putting that
On it.
in, and then how long the drying?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, so I've been involved with the raising of one large scale vault, which was a groin vault rather than um, a ribbed one, and it took 3 weeks for us to set all the stones. And this was for a vault that was maybe 18 feet in diameter by 25, 30. Um, and then at the end of 3 weeks, I think as Scott, you were saying earlier, once once all the stones are put in place and they're sort of self-supporting, the we just immediately dropped the centering, and there's this sort of the groin vault sort of settled, and then that was, it was hunky dory. But those were really it had really thick heavy walls on either side, and so I don't know if 3 weeks would be the same turnaround for something that might might really need the lime mortar to be set more
Yeah.
quickly. If the point though, am I anticipating the idea of the green wood is going to deform?
You worked out where I was going. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously one of the strengths of timber framing is that once you've got everything set in place, the pegs in, is it does start to deform slightly, which
Mm.
almost makes the pegs irrelevant in terms of actually trying to take it apart again. So yeah, that was what was going through my mind was how long that period was becoming, and was there a chance that you wouldn't be able to take the frame apart without actually just cutting it away?
Just having to cut it.
Something else to consider, Simon, is that the stones would have been cut possibly before the
Oh
centre.
yes, yeah. That's why I was querying.
You would get somebody. You would
Yeah, I
have
was understanding the
bankers actually
process.
cutting each individual stone. So the stones were all cut to dimension and size and the right
Absolutely.
So that
Absolutely.
as soon as the centre's in, they can start. And we've got stonemasons in work, and they can actually put all those ribs in. And I'm not saying in a day, but it depends on the size. But it depends how many masons there, obviously, and time frame. But the mortar and the stone being laid on top of the formwork, it would be relatively quick.
Mm.
And then you're just waiting on, obviously not the next day, but you're letting the lime mortar set to a
Yeah,
certain
I see. I can't remember with the article that I read, but your statement in terms of the context that Glenn is talking, I think that's a little bit of a myth, Scott. That you could, I mean, on a simple art that hasn't yet got any weight on top of it, yes, you can drop it. But as Glenn said, there is a feeling of that actually, boom. Yeah, moving. You mentioned that literally just a second ago.
Yeah, with
With a larger structure, I think that's a little bit of a myth, Scott.
I've only done that with arch centers for windows.
Yeah, but that's a much more simple structure, isn't it?
Much more simple,
particularly if you're using brick as well.
And it's basically kind of brick lapped slats of wood joined over, so the joins aren't, and it's like two pieces or 3-piece wide, and then you make up two arch centers, and then you've got straps going across, and then your bricks are laid on that for an arch. And as soon as you get your keystone in there and the lime mortar, I don't think it really fully sets. I think that's the thing about lime. Yeah. It's breathable, it's moving.
Oh yeah.
The whole time. But it'll dry out.
Movements in the lands and
evaporate from it and dry out quite rapidly. Once you've got water in it, a bit like cement. Cement obviously goes off maybe 24 hours, and then it's obviously got this length of time where it becomes stronger and then weaker again. But for lime's different. Once it starts, and it will soak into the brick, so that the lime mortar will then soak into the brick as well. So as you start laying those beds of mortar and get the stone on top of that, I would think very, very quickly after that the arch centre could be dropped out of that, and like Glenn said, there might be a little bit of movement where it will drop down a little bit, but then it's all self-loading. It's actually they're all pushing on each other, and there's nowhere for it to go.
Yeah, I just especially with ribs, I would imagine the difference between a ribbed vault and the groin vault is that there's less, because the joints, the joints are much finer. There's a lot less.
Oh yeah.
So it presumably be closer to the brick archways that you're talking about. But one of the things that part of the reason why we're thinking, those sort of pad method would be a potential thing to explore, is a potential remedy to, or a way of addressing the movement of the green wood. So you say, well, if you just have the arch close enough that they don't need to put on some huge block, but then they can then, as you're saying, all these stones have already been pre-cut. They're not cutting the stones to the centering. When they bring the stone in, they can say, oh, well, things have moved slightly here, so I just need to shim up a little bit there, a little bit here. That was part of the reasoning behind it.
My gut also says to me that they wouldn't have actually rotated the actual formwork. That it would have possibly been on wedges. So whenever it's been supported by, be it posts or whatever, they've been folding wedges in there.
Yeah.
And once it's actually built and self-supporting, the wedges could be knocked out, and then the whole thing would actually drop. I'm not saying by a couple of inches or whatever, but that would be enough then to actually drop posts down or whatever. And then, I mean, that is it's a big, heavy piece of formwork you've got there. And as you say, two people probably couldn't lift that down on their own. Even six would probably struggle. But it could be dropped down a couple of inches, even a bit at a time, even just easing it off, and it would self-support itself. But I think definitely folding wedges. That's the way. It's a similar stress on an arch centre for a window. You can put folding wedges on each side and drop them out as soon as it's actually done. I've seen it done right away, and it doesn't move at all, especially with lime mortar. And I know that's only with bricks, and it's a lot less like weight and stuff like that, Simon. But
no, it was just say, it was just I was just interested in the timeline, just to actually see whether that has to come part of the calculation or not.
Yeah.
There is a small thing came in the back of my head as well, and that's what Richard was talking about. Wood arch centres been moved from one place to the other, but they would have shrunk in that time.
Yeah.
The time they'd actually built a whole cathedral or like lots and lots of vaults, if they took it down and moved it somewhere else, it would have shrunk by, I'm not saying by a lot, but maybe so that then the next place would have been small. Maybe they just started building smaller and smaller and smaller. But they were using the same arch centres. The movement would have been enough in the timber through 6 months, a year.
So you end up with the local village hall.
Actually, with this point in mind.
Anyway, thank you very much, Glenn, for your time.
No. Well, thank you. Yeah.
With this point in mind, now. You're saying that the vaults are of very, very close tolerances, the same to each other. Now, when the masons actually make, because I haven't thought about this bit, when they make their stonework, they're making it to a pattern. Do the stonemasons come to site? The centering's in position. They then take out their pattern of the interior radius of the stone and put it over the vault, and then create packings to support their pattern on top of the centering. That way, then they know that when they put that, because they're going to need to know that their stones aren't going to culminate at the top too soon, and likewise, it don't need to be stretching the stones too far. So they would need to have proof that the centering is going to work for their stones. Now, if I was doing it, I'd be making a pattern, a couple of sheets of MDF up there, and but you know what I mean. And that would explain away any vagaries to do with shrinkage or the pattern or even the centering not being 100%. It's down to the carpenters to put the center in there, then the masons to come in and put their packings to carry their stones, or even a mortar bed that they would put on and then put the stone that put a pattern. Yeah, anyway, I think you get the gist of what.
On that point, is there actually any historic sort of evidence that sort of a group of, or a master mason and a master carpenter sort of stuck together to go and work on different
so from move from site to site?
Yeah. So because they had each other's tape measures were the same length, type thing.
Yeah.
Is there any historical evidence for that?
To be honest, I am not 100% sure. I'm sure that there is some of it, because we definitely have certain master builders that tend to make the rounds. And we also have building accounts that are explicit. Like, for example, when Canterbury Cathedral burned down in the um, in the 1100s, they explicitly say that they hired a guy named William, a Frenchman named William, who is a master of both wood and stone. So somebody who had experiences of both. And then when he falls off some scaffolding, they then get another guy, this time a William the Englishman, who is also experienced in wood and stone. So I think you're right. There probably were people that were traveling around, and this is where um I think I'm just trying to see if he's on hand. There's John Harvey. I think it's John Harvey's biography of medieval craftsmen might be able to identify some, but there it's a long-winded way of me saying that there clearly have to be people who are are experienced with each other and will be working together on multiple sites once you get to a certain status. There's a theory that the Mason lodges are developed earlier than other crafts because there'd be fewer a timber somebody who works in wood is always going to have work in their locality, be it for vernacular building or for sort of public buildings and private dwellings or high status structures where the Masons have a much limited, much more focused clientele. But I think even then there are definitely timber framer, like timber rights and woodworkers who are traveling quite a bit. So
okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Just trying to think, Andy, I remember what your the pattern question. With those building receipts, we definitely have pattern or we have accounts of templates that were developed at the on those tracing floors being shipped off to the quarry for the stone because the cartage for the material was often twice the cost of the material itself. It was the most expensive part of getting the material to site if it was coming from a distance. And so the more that they could remove at the quarry, the cheaper it ended up being um, on on site. So we have accounts of the templates moving, and then once they show up, once this, I think the idea is that the quarries would have perhaps got them close, and they just would have banged out a whole bunch of them that had been slightly different lengths, and said, okay, these are all slightly different lengths, but they'll be close enough for what you need. And then on site, the masons would have put the final curvature that they needed on them. And then based on whatever the exact arc of the vault was. But I guess the reasoning behind I was saying is you placing if I start with this one. Oops. If I should share this again, it would just be easier to point it out. The reasoning behind placing the stone first, sorry, the boss stone as the first stone, is that the masons would lay, they wouldn't have to make sure that they had the right number of stones or the right lengths of stones exactly, because they could just lay this, they could cut the same curve on a whole bunch of basically random stock until they got to the penultimate stone that came in next to the boss. And then they could just measure whatever the distance is between that was left, and then stick their stone. They could go find the stone that fit into that point, which would be easier than trying to trim, make sure everything was exact all the way through. that's the argument that a lot of the stonemasons that we've worked with sort of bring out. But we also run into, like, Lincoln Cathedral has an instance where one side of the vault, the stones are nice and smooth in their arch. On the other side of the vault, you can't see it from the ground, but when you scan it, you actually see that the stones have the mortar beds are slightly splayed, where the curvature that the stones were cut on wasn't, they had to sort of fudge it in order to actually span the space on the other side. And so they sort of opened up the arch a little bit, so it has this sort of saw, wave, wave effect, but it sort of bodged it in. If that, I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's all this to say is that I think we feel the we currently think that the templates were used sort of earlier on with the cutting of the stones, and then once they got to the centering, they then just made it work with packers and wedges.
That scenario you just mentioned about it being the hump instead of the curve, maybe there was a partial collapse, and the top edge is closed and the bottom edge is open, which would give that and bit of fancy pointing. You'd never know.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's just a theory for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's all we have. So your theory is probably just as, if not more, valid.
I think the stones were. It's not the same as a brick mortar bed, like 10 millimeters. I think they were a lot finer than that. It was a lot finer mortar bed between the stones. I'm not going to say 6 or 8 mil, but it was a lot smaller. It wasn't the same as what we have these days on modern houses, like a 10 mil brick mortar bed. It'd be a lot finer bed in between each stone, so the stones are basically, and that's where the lime wouldn't take very much to actually dry out. You're not going to get big wide beds in your mortar, I don't think. I think they'd be quite fine. I've seen the stonemasons actually build stuff, and they have quite fine mortar beds between them when they're building it.
I think quite an accompaniment to follow up on this program would be have a nice stonemason to come and answer these questions that we're spouting about now.
We've got stonemasons in work that actually teach this stuff, so I work in a college, Glenn, so we teach stonemasonry apprentices as well as joinery apprentices and stuff like that. So there's a guy in work. I'm going to let him watch
stonemason from this job after he's done it.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we'll have to then talk to your college, Scott, to see if they want to take on a project and build the ribs for us, and then we can do the whole thing.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'll let Daniel and work know. I'll let him watch this, and then see what he says afterwards.
Oh, then Tosspot doesn't know anything.
He's interested. He now teaches kind of lower level joinery classes as well, so he's interested in joinery, but he teaches the stonemasonry apprentices. But I'll definitely get him to have a look and see what he thinks about this. He's definitely done. He does arch centres. I don't think they do any vaulted ceiling work or anything like that in the college, but he's had experience in doing that in the past. So 100%.
Nice. Yeah. Well,
Okay,
cute.
I think that has finally concluded all the questions. So, as tradition goes, I'd like to thank Glenn for a fantastic and very interesting talk tonight. And raise a glass to absent friends and the bench.
Absent friends and the bench.
All right.
Nice talk, Glenn. That was good.